Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by The Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday night. Jacob, how are you?
Hey, man, the mustache is mustaching, so we're doing good.
Bill, welcome back. Was that a vacation or was that a work thing last week?
It was a vacation, but I also still got work done. You know, I don't sleep, Jim. I grind out tape like there's nobody's business. I was out on the trail. You know, the Tropical Bowl was down in Florida, and so was I. So, you know, it NFL draft content with me, it never sleeps.
He's like answering questions and doing research in group chats before I even see them. I don't even know that I don't even know I'm supposed to be doing something, and Bill's already done it.
Well, Bill, your hard work is recognized by me and noticed by me every day, so you are greatly appreciated.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you letting me come on here tonight with Jake and you. And I'd like to also appreciate everybody that's watching on YouTube right now, but we would really appreciate it if you'd hit that subscribe button for us and hit that notification bell. Turn on those notifications. We've got daily draft content. We're doubling down on daily draft content as well. We've got all sorts of things coming down the pike, including this Friday night, our 32 GM mock draft. We're going to do it better than ESPN ever wishes they could. In addition to that, make sure that you follow our lovely moderator, Jim, on X at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. Make sure you follow my co-host Jake at Roachism13 on X as well as go check out his content over at the OBR. They've got some great Cleveland Browns content that I particularly like to enjoy. But Jim, I think I've covered all the housekeeping. Is there anything else you guys want to add before we dive in?
Well, that's good podcast housekeeping. It's a good thing that this camera is pointed to a corner, because if it went anywhere else, you would see that I clearly need a housekeeper. I'm just saying.
Right.
You can see the mess in my hotel room just over my shoulder. It's not
right. But you can always call for turn down service. That's fine. It just makes sure that if they come on camera, they've got to give some kind of a take.
Yeah.
That can work. So we are here today to discuss how the Kansas City Chiefs built their team. Mm-hmm. So every night this week, we've covered a different team. We did the Commanders on Monday. We did the Eagles on Tuesday. We're doing the Chiefs tonight. We're doing the Bills tomorrow. What we're looking for, as we did our research, were roster trends. How'd they handle the salary cap? How did they handle the draft? Did they target specific positions in specific rounds? I think like last night with the Eagles, we definitely got a great we'll call it a profile of Howie Roseman. Like there was really a lot of data that was there behind it. Today we're diving into the Chiefs. I'm going to kind of kick this off with a couple of pieces of data. So in 2021, the Chiefs had 23 players on their roster that they drafted. 2024, they are up to 31. 31 players on the current Chiefs roster that they drafted. 10 of those players were on both rosters. So meaning 10 players that they had on the roster in 2021 are still on the roster under contract in 2024. And I will point out that 10, there is a line there. So you want to be 9 or higher. As I'm looking at the chart, the teams that are 9 or higher are generally the teams that we would consider to be contenders. And whether you're looking at that as the Cincinnati Bengals, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 49ers, Cowboys, Buffalo, Philadelphia, Miami are all at 9 or higher on that, where they've kept players on their team for more than 4 years. And one of the reasons I point that out is that the Chiefs have done a reasonable job of, let's say, moving on from Tyreek Hill, for example, and yet they're able to replace him. So while Hill may have been on the 2021 roster, he's not on the 2024. A good GM knows when to move on. A couple of other pieces of data on the Chiefs. They have 4 All-Pros. They drafted 14 of their 22 starters. They acquired 6 of their starters in free agency. They traded to get one of their starters, and one of their starters was a UDFA.
Yeah.
But that being said, so like Jacob or Bill, like what do you guys think? Like what kind of, either off of the data I presented or maybe data that you pulled, what do you see as maybe some of the trends?
You talk about the 10 and it being from there to the second. I love the concept of 3-4 years down the road, somebody that you drafted is still there because there's a good chance they made a second contract. And that to me is the biggest success. Not the very, but that is very indicative of a good draft pick, is them making a second contract with their team. I can't tell you how many people the Browns have drafted in the past that don't make a second contract with their team. And then sometimes they get better when they leave, but whatever.
Right.
Duh. But yeah, I just think that that's very important looking at that. And you talked really important thing there. You talked about Tyreek Hill. You know, they moved on from Tyreek Hill and they reloaded through the draft because they paid certain people these big contracts. Well, the way you're going to offset these big contracts is you've got to draft well. And most of your starters are your draft picks. And my general philosophy when it comes to the way that you build a team, I think you build the core in the draft. And I think you find a missing piece in free agency. Joe Thuney is a great example for the Kansas City Chiefs. You're talking about a team that they had some offensive line issues at guard specifically. They were having kind of some trouble there for a while, like really solidifying it. And they're like, well, we're going to go pay. You know, when Joe Thuney comes on the market, I was surprised he ever made it out of New England just because of the caliber of player he was. And they were like, okay, you know, maybe we don't spend a ton of money here and there in free agency because we lean on what we do as, you know, drafting wise, but we know that there's a few missing pieces and we think paying this guy is going to come. And now he's playing at left tackle. He's playing pretty well at left tackle. Of course, Miles beat him like a drum in the regular season, but he does that to most people, right? But you know, like I'm always like, find your missing pieces there through free agency, and you kind of plug and play them there in that situation. And of course, Creed Humphrey is just a phenomenal center, and you know, and that's a draft pick. But you know what I mean? It's just you're trying to find these pieces where you can find them. To plug in what you can't do through the draft. But I think the most of the legwork should be through the draft. That's just my opinion.
How about you, Bill?
No, Jake's nail on the head. This is a team. You should always look to build through the draft. And while I agree with the second contract thought, I'm also of the thought that if that player earns a second contract elsewhere, that's still a success because you now have a guy who's getting paid by someone else. Tyreek Hill goes and gets paid by Miami. You look at this free agent class for the Chiefs. Trey Smith is going to be a free agent. He's going to get paid somewhere else. Justin Reed's a free agent. He'll get paid somewhere else. Nick Bolton's a free agent. He'll get paid somewhere else. Because you look at the Chiefs cap in 2025, they're 11 million under the cap, but they have 9 players that are unrestricted free agents with at least 30% of their snaps this year. So this is a team that's going to lose some pieces. So what do? In last year's draft, they take guys in advance of that. In the 7th round, taking CJ Hansen at guard and Hunter Norzad in the 5th round. One of those guys, are they going to stick at guard? Potentially. Maybe not. It's going to kind of depend on that. The other big thing that we have to give credit to is that the Chiefs are a self-aware team that knows their weaknesses. Jake, I'm glad you hit on that offensive line concern. Over the last 3 years, so 21 to 24, with Borgonzi getting hired in Tennessee, I took a look at the Chiefs draft history. Of their 30 picks in that time, 11 of them were in the trenches and 9 of them were in defensive backfields, corners and safeties. Where have the Chiefs had the most issues over the past couple of years? In the trenches and in the defensive backfield. So they know, hey, these are an issue. Let's bulk out. If we throw enough darts at it, we've got to hit a bullseye at some point.
Yeah.
It's the law. It's the law of the factor of numbers. You throw enough cards in the deck, you're more than likely going to pull a blackjack. Yeah. So the big thing, though, that I will make sure that we call attention to, and Newt and I talked about this on a DNA of a rebuild when we talked about the Commanders and the Texans. This Chiefs team knows what they are, and they know who they are from the top down. Brett Veach knows what he wants in his players. He knows what he knows what his staff wants. Andy Reid knows what he wants his players to do and what scheme he wants to run, and he's passed that on to his coordinators. Guys like Nagy and Spagnuolo and even Dave Tube, who's been a special teams guru for years. They know, I like to call it the Chiefs way. Yes, you could say they make the playoffs every year because of Patrick Mahomes. But if you eliminate Patrick Mahomes from this equation, pull him out of the equation, and you put in an average quarterback play, this team still probably is pretty good because of the infrastructure they built around him. Now, having a guy like Patrick Mahomes makes the margin for error much wider. I mean, you look at it this season, their score if you reversed all of their wins, losses in 1-score games. So every game that they won it by a 1 score or less, and every game they lost by 1 score or less, this team would be picking top 3 in the NFL draft. What that shows is that Andy Reid has put a scheme in place that knows how to win when you need to win by any means necessary. It's not go out there and blow the doors off of somebody. It's go out there, play our brand of football for 60 minutes, and come home with a win. However, we've got to do that. So that's how this Chiefs team is built. Is it sustainable? Absolutely. But where the concerns lie is how do you move on from those guys like the Tyreek Hill, the Trey, the Trey Smith, the Nick Bolton.
So
can you get enough in aggregate?
So I think one skill of a GM that doesn't get talked about enough is knowing when to move on from a player. So when a player gets a second contract from another team, from my standpoint, that's a GM saying we're going to be able to do better either with like a 1-year free agent contract or somebody that we've already drafted. And again, I can flash back to players that Brandon Beam moved on from, but we do need to point out that the Chiefs have moved on from Tyreek Hill and L'Jarius Sneed. Mm-hmm. Two like all pro caliber players in a span of 4 years.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like that's significant when you know that you can move on from the player, because actually moving on from Sneed is looking like it was a really good move.
Well, Trent McDuffie's been phenomenal for them.
Yeah,
like,
right.
It plays to what you said, Bill, and we've seen this to a lesser degree because not everything has worked out super well in Cleveland. But Andrew Berry follows that thought too, where like if there is a free agent corner after 2025, in the 2025 draft, if he's like, I might not re-sign Greg Newsome, I'm going to go take Will Johnson. Like the Chiefs do that so well. You highlighted a couple of examples of it, Bill, but like the Trent McDuffie in the situation with why could
L'Jarius Sneed.
Why is it so hard tonight? But yeah, like and they played together, and you could see McDuffie, and you're like, okay, I don't need to pay Snead anymore. I don't need to do this. I'll get it. I'll let him. They didn't let him walk. They traded him, which they did with Tyreek Hill. So you get an asset in that situation, and you feel great about what you've got there. And it's like that's what the best teams do. They do it in advance. You don't need to have a left tackle this year and take your left tackle. I mean, it can work out, but you talked about them taking 2 day 3 guards. They've gotten a really good look at those guards because they've had them in that building for a year. And now they're like, do we feel comfortable letting Trey Smith walk? I think we do because we've got these guys. And if those guys aren't the guys, they can just pivot and go pay somebody or bring Trey Smith back or something of that nature. But you're putting it in the pipeline to where you're like, I don't need to overreact and throw money in places and mismanage my cap because I didn't plan for the future. The draft is your foundation, but I always love a GM. Like, yeah, I know your first round pick, often you want them to be a significant contributor as a rookie because it's a first round pick. But like the draft is for the future in my mind. And if you get something from them early, great. But especially after the first round, it's like, hey, I'm good. I don't need to panic in free agency, and I can, be a little bit more strategic if I draft in advance and I do it well.
Yep. So a couple of, let's say, roster trends. So all 4 of the teams that are still playing have a free agent or one or more starting on the offensive line. So the Chiefs have 2. So 2 of their starting offensive linemen were acquired by free agents. Buffalo also, 2 of their starting offensive linemen were free agent acquisitions. In addition to that, it's the positions that get traded for. Every single team that is still playing acquired a player by trade, and that player is most often a corner or a wide receiver or both. So in the Chiefs' case, they have one starter that they've acquired by trade that's a starting wide receiver. The Commanders acquired a wide receiver the Commanders only acquired a corner. The Eagles acquired 2 wide receivers and 1 corner by trade. That are starting. So the positions you're going to target in a trade are probably corner and wide receiver. The positions you're going to target in free agency are probably interior offensive line.
Yep.
All 4 teams still playing drafted their quarterback. And 3 of the 4 drafted their quarterback in round 1.
Okay.
Now, here's an interesting stat. Only 2 of the 4 teams drafted their offensive tackles. That one surprised me.
Oh, that does surprise me.
Yeah, because we always talk about franchise left tackle, right?
Yeah.
Jacob, you should see the way your eyes peaked up. Yeah. That surprised me as I was digging through the draft picks and like mapping them to starters and stuff. So the Bills drafted both of their tackles. And the Eagles drafted both of theirs. But the Commanders and the Chiefs, their tackles were found in free agency.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to mention that first year that Andy Reid was in Kansas City, they had the number 1 overall pick and they took Eric Fisher, a supposed franchise left tackle, didn't end up developing it that way. And I think they ended up being gun shy from that point because they didn't take a tackle that high again until 2020 when they took Niang in the 3rd round. So they said, look, we're going to take a shot at it because it's supposed to be a franchise left tackle. And that class had Eric Fisher, Luke Jokel, guys that were supposed to be franchise guys. They just didn't develop that way. That's just not how the ball rolled. But then they said, if we can go out and we can find a replacement level, I won't call it average, I won't call it adequate, but replacement level play on the offensive line, let's see if we can repurpose that talent elsewhere. because what we don't talk about enough is, yes, it's Patrick Mahomes. Yes, it's Jaden Daniels. Yes, it's Josh Allen. Good quarterback play will mask a lot of deficiencies that a team has. From an offensive line standpoint, for example, if I have a quarterback that can make a quick read, get the ball out quickly, I don't need an offensive tackle to hold up for 4 or 5 seconds because the quarterback's going to get the ball out quick.
And to Jacob's point, Myles Garrett sounds like he had a pretty good day when he played the Chiefs.
Yep.
But how many teams have a game record like that? Right? So meaning that if you're building the team, you say, okay, well, we're going to have problems with Pittsburgh. We're going to have problems with Cleveland. We may have problems if we play Dallas with Micah Parsons because they have game records. And our tackles, our replacement level starters, can't handle the game records.
Yeah.
But realistically, if you look at the playoff teams, the game records on the Eagles are inside.
Mm-hmm.
The game records on the Commanders, I'm trying to think. I would actually say their linebackers are their biggest playmakers in defense. And, I mean, they have Newton, and they have a strong – I mean, the Commanders have a strong interior, but I wouldn't consider any of the guys in the Commanders' interior a game record to the level of a Myles Garrett.
No.
Jones.
You have above average guys like Jonathan Allen and Newton that you hit on. They're not a game record. They're not a Miles. They're not a TJ. They're not a Micah Parsons type of guy. No.
Yeah, right. And if the Chiefs were to look in the mirror and say, okay, who's our best competition in the AFC? Buffalo, Baltimore. I wouldn't say that Buffalo or Baltimore has a game record on their defensive line. That's not how either of those two teams are built. You guys may disagree with me on Baltimore. Baltimore has a better defensive line than Buffalo does, but I would not say that Baltimore has a game record on their front four.
They have above average guys, but I wouldn't call them like they're good. They have some really good guys. Yeah. That's about as far as it goes.
Yeah, they could start on other teams, but they wouldn't be a game. They're not a guy that an offensive coordinator circles on the game plan and says we have to account for this guy every snap.
Are they Bill Belichick's Tuesday players?
Yeah.
Right? Kind of thing.
Exactly.
So the reason I point that out is Kansas City may have known that if there's a position that they can survive with a replacement level starter, to Jacob's point, it's actually an offensive tackle because the playoff teams in the AFC don't necessarily have somebody that's going to exploit the weakness at tackle the way a Micah Parsons or a Myles Garrett would.
I mean, and they're very close to having a shot to three-peat with that as. Oh my goodness! Yep. No wonder the heat. I just figured out that the reason that my charger on my new laptops was really hot, there's still cardboard on it.
Very nice.
Huh.
I thought he was going to tell us he forgot to plug it in, but yeah.
Yeah, close enough, right?
It's the same thing.
But and another thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say another thing too that isn't often talked about is going back to the same point about knowing what you want and what your team wants. There was a story, I believe it was Todd McShay on his podcast that mentioned it, but Brett Veach knew that he wanted Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback. Patrick Mahomes' freshman year in college, he identified him during the scouting process and says, this is a Kansas City Chief. And there's stories about him going into Andy Reid's office every single day. Did you watch the tape on Mahomes? Did you watch this tape? Did you watch this tape? And then when it comes time where Mahomes comes out, Jim, you know very well, they weren't in a position to take him. They had to trade up with Buffalo to go get him. But what they said was, this is a guy, our guy, that we're going to stand firm. We know what he's going to bring to the table for us. We're going to go get him. And it ended up working out. And even then, anybody that'll tell you, I know when I evaluated that class in 2017, I said firmly, it was a reach. I said it was a reach on Patrick Mahomes to take him at 10th overall because his footwork was, to put it politely, dumpster fire. He was a guy that had never played in a drop back passing offense. He was firmly in the shotgun. He had the arm talent, but he was a lot of backyard football, kind of how we talked about Caleb, right? And what happened was Andy Reid came in and said, okay, this is his strengths. Here's my scheme. How do I marry the two? And when we talked about it earlier this week with Washington and Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury, the same thing. Here's Jaden Daniels' strengths. Here's Cliff Kingsbury's scheme. How do I marry the two? Jalen Hurts in Philly. Here's what Jalen Hurts does really well. Here's what we do well in Philly. Let's marry the two. Buffalo and Josh Allen, same conversation. Joe Brady comes in, right? Joe Brady says, okay, I have Josh Allen, this alien of a quarterback. Here's my scheme. How do I get the most out of him?
Yep. And
Can I tell you my biggest draft win ever?
Sure.
I was in Afghanistan telling everybody that kid from Texas Tech is QB1 in this class. Now, did I think he would be the greatest of all time? God, no. But I did. I was on the Patrick Mahomes train.
And to the point where, okay, so from a team building standpoint, I'm always of the opinion that you trade up and you get your guy.
Hmm?
I'm always fascinated when teams say, well, let's trade back and we can get the quarterback. Like, let's say Milrow's your guy. Let's trade back because we can get Milrow at the back of round one. If you're trading back, he's not your guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just telling you. You trade up to get your guy the way that the Chiefs traded up to get Mahomes. The same way I believe the Broncos traded up one spot to go get Nicks. Right?
Broncos traded up to get Nicks. Buffalo traded up to get Josh Allen. Baltimore traded up to get to Lamar as well.
Did Minnesota trade it up for JJ, right? Am I crazy?
Yeah, and I may have had Nicks and JJ flipped.
Yeah, I believe Minnesota traded up one spot as well to go get JJ.
You trade up, even if it's one spot, you make sure you get your guy. And that's from a team building standpoint. Go get your guy. You don't trade back to get your guy. You trade up to get your guy. Now, if you're in the situation of like the Patriots or the Commanders last year, you can't really trade up any higher than they were in the draft order. That's okay. Right?
Yeah.
But if you're sitting there in the teens, you don't wait for your guy to fall. You trade up and you go get it.
That's like there was this ultimate dilemma back in, what was that, 2018. The Browns had picks 1 and 4 because they had they had the first round pick from Houston, and then that had been Watson. Funny enough, that had been Watson's rookie year. He tears his ACL. They win 4 games. Cleveland's got pick 1 and 4. And this debate raged and raged and raged. And everybody was like, listen, because that was that great Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold. It was this class, the Josh Rosen. But
Don't put
put
that curse on me. Rosen was my QB1, and that's probably my biggest draft miss that I'll load up to.
But everybody missed. Like if everybody misses, it's not really a miss.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we all missed. And so, but the dilemma was like, hey, all of these guys are going to be there. You knew that at number 2 that the Giants weren't taking a quarterback. Like it was like the Giants are at 2, so all you had to compete with was the Jets at 3 in terms of what you were going to do at quarterback. And so there was this conversation of, well, take Saquon Barkley at 1 because you can get one of these quarterbacks at 4. Like you will be fine. You can get, and it was this debate where it was like, you won't get Barkley because if you don't take Barkley, he's going to go 2 to the Giants. Like it was the worst kept secret in everywhere. And it was like, even and Baker Mayfield was not projected to be. I had no clue until the day of the draft. And the day of the draft, the fires started. I was like, there is a lot of smoke. And about 30 minutes before the draft started, I looked at my dad and I said, they're taking Baker Mayfield. He said, no, they're not. They're not. I'm like, listen to me. They're taking Baker Mayfield. And then everybody screams and yells and goes crazy about it. And it's like, he would have been there at 4. And he would have. Because I think Sam Darnold still would have been there because that's who the Jets wanted. But you don't risk it. You do not risk it.
Right.
Like you talk like the Jalen Milroe conversation. I know it's super crazy to think that the Browns could take him at number 2, and I'm not lobbying for that right now. I'm not going to do that. But to think like some people are like, well, we'll trade back to like 9 or 10 and take him there because it'll be more acceptable to take him there. If he's your guy, take him. Because if he is your guy, I don't care. I don't care if it's this is gonna make me throw up. I don't care if it's Jackson Dart. Take whoever is your guy. Just
mock drafts always look better when you trade down. Like if you do a mock draft, you always make it always looks better if you have like 3 picks in rounds 2 and 3. It always looks better. However, when it comes to team building and you need a guy on offense, and my opinion is most teams want a guy on defense, but you could debate as to, is it better to have 5 above average guys versus 1 game wrecker on defense? The Chiefs happen to have a game wrecker, right? I mean, Chris Jones is really 1-of-1, right? Once Aaron Donald retired, he's 1 of 1 kind of thing. So, it helps when you have 3 Hall of Fame players playing on your team. Because I think out of all the playoff teams, the Chiefs are the only one where I look at the roster and I say that they have 3 Hall of Fame players. And I would be hard-pressed to say that there's any other Hall of Fame players playing in the playoffs still. Like, I'm a Bills fan. I'm not putting Josh Allen in the Hall of Fame yet.
No.
Like, he's not there.
And also, what other team has a Hall of Fame head coach right now?
Correct. That's a great point. Yep.
And if you stack them up, Andy Reid, Sean McDermott, Nick Sirianni, and Dan Quinn, I think Andy Reid, the only one who's close is McDermott, and it's not close.
No, it's not close. I'm a Bills fan, and that's, you can't even make. I would be laughed out of whatever chat room I was in if I even tried to make that comparison.
Yeah, that like not only do they have Hall of Fame talent, they have Hall of Fame coaching staffs. Like you look, Andy Reid, the head coach, their associate head coach, Dave Tube, has been a special teams genius since 2001 in Philly. He helped John Harbaugh win the special teams coach of the year while in Philly, then goes to Chicago and turns Devin Hester into a Hall of Famer. Then he comes to Kansas City with Andy Reid. You go on down the list. Matt Nagy looks like a genius in Kansas City, goes to Chicago away from Andy Reid. It falls apart, comes back, looks like a genius again. Steve Spagnuolo, we've all talked about his record outside of Kansas City when he's the head coach of the New York Giants and also before that with the St. Louis Rams. So it also bears repeating that coaching matters. And I think if we're talking about these 4 teams, Kansas City has that extra box to check that you now have to overcome. You not only have to overcome 3 Hall of Fame talents, you have to overcome a 4th one wearing a headset.
Well, I was going to say, what happened to Eric Bieniemy when he finally got away to prove himself away from Andy Reid?
But I think the Bieniemy issue is more of his personality than it is his X's and O's. Because my understanding is he comes across very abrasive in coaching interviews and in meeting rooms.
Yeah, I've heard that there is some of that stuff out there. And then, of course, there's a lot of stuff that like people just don't want to talk about his head coaching tenure at Colorado. Like people just don't want to talk about it. And whenever that is a thing, I'm always like a little bit. But I mean, yeah, you look at them from top to bottom and you put something in place on the premium positions. You put a lot of emphasis. You went and you got your quarterback, right? You've spent money on that offensive line. I know they've done the replacement players and stuff there too, but they've invested a ton of draft picks. They've invested a ton to get it right. Like, rather it's middling free agents because that Travis Kelce is just going to sit in the zone and Mahomes is going to find him in half a second, so you don't have to block for very long, whatever it is. But that's also Andy Reid being like, hey, we don't need to throw gobs and gobs of money at tackle because I can make my scheme move around what I've got there. So wherever they put all this premium stuff that they play Chris Jones because they understand that wreaking havoc against the quarterback. I said wrecking havoc on the quarterback in the pass game. You got to do it. Okay. You got to do it from somewhere. I don't care necessarily. And it could even be the defensive backfield. But you need to be able to neutralize somewhere. So it's like, we're going to go at premium positions. We're going to spend draft capital and we're going to spend money. Everywhere else, we're going to kind of use young players and maybe a plug and play here. But these premium positions, the head coach, the quarterback, they got it all right. And they said, okay, now we just build around that. Now you just build around that and you build to the strengths of your best players. You get people that are, in terms of wide receivers and pass catchers, they've always had an emphasis on guys that do not quit on the play because of what Mahomes does, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times I've watched scrambling quarterbacks running for their lives in Cleveland and wide receivers that are just like, oh, I'm over here, the quarterback's over there, so I can't do anything. Yep. Go watch any of Patrick Mahomes' games.
So, Jacob, you just clued me in on something. We have, keeping in mind that this is the third podcast we've done in team building. Nobody's brought it up, but what you just said triggered this. So, Jacob, rank the wide receiver rooms of the 4 playoff teams.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Is it Philly? I think it's Philly's number.
Oh, I think Philly's 1, right? Bill, would you disagree if Philly being 1?
I think it's Philly is 1, and there's a chasm between that.
But the next 3 are going to be really tough to figure out because there's a huge tier break between how Philly built their team and how the other 3 wide receiver rooms were built. But Jacob, until you were just explaining that, like Bill, as you were explaining where the Chiefs spent their draft capital, you said trenches and DBs.
Yep.
Right? The Chiefs aren't drafting wide receivers the way Green Bay is. And I realize Green Bay's not playing, but Green Bay, in last offseason, Green Bay was the prototype wide receiver room. Because they have a lot of guys that do different things, but they don't really have a alpha wide receiver. They have a lot of B-plus wide receivers.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, right? So, like, as I'm looking, because, like, I think the Commanders, the number of times that we mock draft a wide receiver to round 1 to the Commanders is quite high. Right? Like, we think that that's one of the biggest needs on the team.
Am I crazy to say they're 2?
I don't think you're crazy because I think McLaurin is more proven than anybody on Buffalo for certain.
Let me ask this, though, and I'm gonna twist it a little bit because I always like to play a little devil's advocate. When you say rank the wide receivers, are you saying just the wide receiver rooms?
I said wide receiver rooms.
All passes?
Yes.
Okay.
I said wide receiver
I was just making sure we're not including all pass catchers like tight end and everything because that's going to push Kansas City up, obviously, with Kelce. But I wanted to make sure to clarify.
But I would definitely say the Commanders, like McLaurin, would clearly start on both Buffalo and Kansas City. But there would be a debate as whether or not McLaurin would start for Philly. Just because Philly's room, they have two good guys, right? Yeah. You have McLaurin, you might find a way for Philly. But the point being is that, okay, and then somewhere between, Kansas City's wide receiver room is probably better than Buffalo's. It pains me to say that, but I think I have to make that statement.
It pains me because I don't know what the hell happened to Amari Cooper. Because that dude set a franchise he set a franchise record for Cleveland last year and set a career high in receiving yards last year. And I get he didn't want to be in Cleveland in the dumpster fire that was that quarterback situation, but then he's done nothing in Buffalo. I don't know, but
So his first game with Buffalo was pretty good, but we think he got hurt, even though he didn't take himself out of the game. One of the podcasters for Buffalo has a physical therapist in his follower, and he runs a page called Banged Up Bills, and he was able to say, look at how he got up from that hit. They said he wasn't right. So my instinct is that Buffalo was saving Cooper for the playoffs. Once he got hurt, they're like, we don't need him to get through the regular season. We're going to save him for the playoffs. Buffalo kept Keon Coleman. Like, they could have put Keon Coleman on IR because he missed more than 4 games in a row, but they chose not to, right? They're just like, get everybody healthy. Yeah. And Buffalo is healthier right now than they have been the last 5 years. Like, it's not even close. Like, literally last year in the playoffs, we were starting a linebacker that was going on vacation after Thanksgiving. But, like, it was AJ Klein. But, like, we had enough injuries in our linebacker room that we're like, it's better to get AJ Klein, who had been cut, was not on an NFL team, about to go on vacation with the family, and say, we need you in our building. Like, nobody else on waivers, we want AJ Klein. So, anyways, like, I would definitely say, like, Jacob, as you were kind of going through, okay, so from a team building standpoint, the Chiefs have done a really good job of piecing together a wide receiver room with really low-cost free agents, Juju Smith-Schuster, Mecole Hardman. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know, did they draft Hardman, or they may have let him go and then brought him back?
They drafted him in 2019. So the one thing I will mention, before Xavier Worthy in 2024, the Chiefs had only drafted 3 wide receivers since 2021, 2 in the second round, 1 in the 5th. And to get a wide receiver drafted by Kansas City in the first round, you have to go all the way back to Jonathan Baldwin in 2011. It's something they don't do.
The Green Bay philosophy. Yes.
You also don't have to. You also don't have to as much when you got Patrick Mahomes, but like that's still an overall interest. See, because that's kind of my thing too. Is like, and I know some of the wide receiver moves were not completely tied to Jalen Hurts, but is this kind of a thing where it was like, I think we need to elevate Jalen Hurts a little bit more than these other teams think they need to give weapons to their quarterbacks. And I know Washington's kind of in a weird situation because they just got their quarterback. That's a very unique situation with them being from the second overall pick to being in the conference championship game. But like, you look at it where it's like, as long as Kelsey's there, as long as Patrick Mahomes has an old reliable, just somebody that when he's in trouble, he knows is going to catch the ball and is going to be open, he can make anybody else work. Like Juju Smith-Schuster's back there. Like because they were just like, we need one of these big power slots with the Rashee Rice thing going on and all that stuff. We need somebody. Oh yeah, we'll just bring Juju. It'll be fine. He hasn't really done anything outside of when he was here the first time in his rookie year and when he had Antonio Brown. But then you're looking at. I know that Buffalo makes the move for Amari and they make they trade for Keon Coleman, but like. They haven't put a ton of emphasis there in a sense because they're like, it's fine. It doesn't matter. He'll figure it out. And then it's kind of like in Philly, they're like, we like Jalen, but.
Yep.
And I just wonder, and I'm like, and I like Jalen. Listen, I take Jalen Hurts at Cleveland. I'm not stupid. I'm just saying the overall philosophy there is like, if you really, really trust your quarterback, you're not worried about a shelling out a ton at that premium position.
Yep.
One of the things that David pointed out with the Eagles, as far as you pointing that out, Jacob, was that the Eagles swung and missed on Rieger.
Yeah.
They didn't become gun shy. They drafted Devontae Smith the very next year. And I don't know if they traded up to get him, but they swung and missed. And they didn't become gun shy. Like some teams you miss on a player in round 1, and then you just stop drafting the position, and you're like, well, we may as well just like fill it with day 3 guys because we don't scout that position well or something to that effect. So, Bill, what were you about to chime in?
I was to say two things. The first thing is it's the Tua conversation in Miami, right? Is Tua your guy? If he's not your guy, you got to load up all these weapons, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, the running backs, Achane, things like that. But the second thing that you talked about gun-shy, when they drafted Jonathan Baldwin in the first round in 2011, Kansas City took a couple of wide receivers the next year, round 4, round 7. But then after that, they don't take another wide receiver before pick 75. Closest one is 76 in 2015. And then after that, you don't see them take another wide receiver early until 2019 when they took McCole Hardman in the second round. So when they busted out on him, they somewhat got gun shy. But the thing that they know in Kansas City, look at the 5 highest cap hits for Kansas City: Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones, Jawan Taylor, Joe Thuney, Travis Kelce. 6th one being Creed Humphrey. All of those 6 players have a cap hit of larger than 10 million. So they said these guys are going to be our focal points: offensive line, all reliable, game-wrecking defensive tackle, and a quarterback. That's who we're going to pay. That's where our cap money is going to go. We're going to have to piece the rest of it. And if you have to piece the rest of it around those 6 guys, I think any team would be fine with that.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because so if we were to compare that to the way that Dallas, we could probably look at Dallas and say that their top 6 players probably take up a very similar percentage of the cap, maybe even a little bit more. But I would definitely say from a team building without a doubt, we say Kansas City has built their team better because look at Kansas City's playing. Dallas didn't even make the playoffs. So because some of the draft data actually shows that like Dallas, 33 players that are on the roster that they've drafted, 10 of which have been on the team for 4 years, which is almost identical numbers. Kansas City was 31-10. Cowboys were 33-10. Right? But the difference is the quality of those 33 versus the quality of the 31. Mm-hmm. Right? Like swinging and missing on a Mozzie Smith versus hitting on like a Xavier Worthy type situation. But my opinion is that if you're trying to piece a team or a roster together, you're more likely to be able to go to free agency and find pieces, interior offensive line, linebacker, safety, and wide receiver. Every year, you're going to be able to find a free agent wide receiver.
Yep.
Right? Go ahead.
I was just say, which is good for Kansas City this year because 2 of their top 3 free agents this year, linebacker and Nick Bolton, safety and Justin Reed. So they can just as easily say, we're going to find those pieces in free agency and just continue the cycle.
Right. That's exactly right. So why don't we pause for a second? So, Bill, do you want to kind of let everybody know who you are, how they can find your content?
Yeah, so you can find a majority of my content on X at Spark Scouting on X. That's where a lot of my stuff is. I'm also a writer and analyst for TWSN, the Right Way Sports Network. You can check that out over at twsn.net, as well as I am here at the Draft Professor, providing you all sorts of NFL draft content, housed on Wednesday nights. Sometimes I'll pop up on Friday nights, like this Friday with our 32 GM mock draft. But a majority of my stuff gets housed on X at Spark Scouting. Jake, where can the people find you?
I'm always like, what am I doing on Friday? You always throw me. I always get thrown off by everything. I'm like, what's going on? You can find me over on X at Roachism13. I do a lot of stuff there. Mostly I just post my content because like anytime I try to have a respectful debate on social media, it never goes well. So most of the time I'm not as into the social media sharing as whatnot. But you can find my draft content at theobr.com, right, for the Orange and Brown Report. It's centered around the Cleveland Browns, but I do a lot of it, the real overall stuff and whatnot, that sort of thing. But you can also find me on youtube.com/at the Orange and Brown Report. On Mondays, we got dueling mock drafts every Monday live, doing a couple of Browns mock drafts and some random draft content there as well. We'll have a Senior Bowl preview hopefully out this weekend.
Well, I definitely want to give props. So Jacob, one of the reasons I came up with this idea at the podcast is I would 1,000 times over rather talk on a podcast with the two of you for an hour than to reply faceless photos on Twitter.
Yeah.
Right? So, there's a reason to form the podcast, because even if nobody is in the chat, I'd still rather talk with the two of you. It's night and day. But similar to what Bill said, so give the channel a follow at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. It is the same on X, Twitter, and YouTube. What you will see if you go to the YouTube station, we did scouting reports on 225 players. So if you want to get okay, my team needs a corner, you can go to the defensive back channel. You can listen to Bill and Randall talk about corners, and you can hear a bunch of other people talk about the same corners. So if 6 people are saying the same thing about Trey Amos, he's probably pretty good. I'm just saying, right? And if, 3 people are saying one thing about a wide receiver and 3 people say something else, there's a good chance that one of the groups of 3 is right, but you have to decide which one. You can make a game out of it.
Yeah.
Right? So the YouTube feed has elite content. And then Friday, as Bill said, we are doing our first 32 GM mock draft of the year. I am excited and nervous all at the same time because it's definitely a production. So if you're listening and you want to draft for a team, there are still about 10 teams that don't have a GM, and the default GMs are either going to be Bill or me. So Bill's going to take 5, I'm going to take 5, and that way we can just keep the draft moving. But if you want to draft for one of those teams, you're not going to have to ask twice. I think it's the right way to say that.
Yeah.
And the channel has daily draft content. Monday through Thursday, we have 2 podcasts a day. And then Fridays, it's always some type of mock draft on Friday nights. So it's just Friday night mock draft. Grab a beverage, hang out. There's going to be 4 of us on the podcast and another 28 people in the chat just talking about the draft. And whenever we get together as draft professors, it's always a good conversation. So please, like I said, follow, subscribe to the channel. Check us out tomorrow night. We're breaking down Buffalo. And prior to breaking down Buffalo, there's going to be a new person breaking down wide receivers. So we get to hear somebody else's opinion on wide receivers tomorrow morning or early tomorrow evening. So check us out. And the best way to know that is just follow the page on Twitter. That's where all of the action happens. But that being said, I guess to summarize, so Jacob, if being a Browns fan, if you had to look at Kansas City, and other than finding a good quarterback, what is a team building lesson that you will take from looking at how Kansas City has built their team?
Don't be, you talked about, Bill, you talked about how many picks in the trenches and in the secondary. And we know at times they've had issues in the trenches at certain spots.
Mm-hmm.
Follow that model. I think following the model and building through the trenches and building in the secondary, even if it doesn't work, keep going after it. Because if you can win up front and you can cover, you can mask a whole lot of other problems.
Yep.
So, Bill, how about you? If you had to look at the Chiefs and extrapolate at least one thing that you would want the Browns to do. more effectively, what would it be?
They kind of already do it, but I want to see him continue it. And it's know when, the old Kenny Rogers song, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to walk away. Know when a player has reached their peak value for you and turn them and burn them. Tyreek Hill, send him off to Miami. Players that they say, hey, you deserve a second contract, but here's what we're going to pay. We're not going to pay you a penny more. If someone else pays that, fine, so be it. But know what the player's value is and where's your line in the sand that you're not willing to cross.
Yes.
Yep. So I have one sarcastic one that I wish Buffalo would do, and that's you have to draft more All-Pros and Hall of Fame players.
Yeah.
Right? That's tongue-in-cheek. But, so just here, again, a little bit of data. So the number of starters drafted of the 4 remaining playoff teams, Buffalo is the most with 17. So Buffalo has drafted 17 of their 22 starters. The Eagles are second with 15. The Chiefs are third with 14, and the Commanders are all the way down to 11. But considering the Commanders are in year 1 of their coaching regime, I'll give the Commanders 11, assuming that number just keeps going up. Because to me, a good team is going to continually have about 15 of their starters are going to be players that they drafted.
Yeah.
However, to me, what the biggest difference is when you look at Buffalo having 17 starters drafted, Buffalo, the only All-Pro we have is Josh Allen. Whereas the Chiefs, 14 of their starters were drafted, and 4 of them are All-Pros.
Yep.
Right. So if I had to sarcastically tell Brandon Beane something, is you have to draft more All-Pros and Hall of Famers.
Right. And that's the other thing, too, that we don't talk about it enough in the draft community, but you're never going to hit on 100% of your players. It's like baseball in the draft community. If you hit 300, if you hit 30% of your picks, you're going to stick around a long time as a GM. Like, could you imagine if we said, hey, we're asking you to pick 50% of your players as all pros? No one's ever that good. I mean, there's teams out there with 50, 60 analytics folks in their departments, and they still have misses. Misses are relevant. I love that little plug there. Misses are relevant around here. So that's the other thing is that, yes, we would love for them to always draft all pros, but also don't be gun shy. Don't be afraid like Philly with Jalen Reagor. Could you imagine if they hadn't taken Devonta Smith and just said, we're not going to do that. We're just going to pick something else.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totally different team.
Totally different team. Yep.
So with that being said, we have been going for close to an hour. So on behalf of the 30 podcasters at the Draft Professor, for Bill at Spark Scouting, for Jacob at Roach, Roachism 13. Yeah, there we go. I was about to say Roach IZM, but at Roachism 13. For me at NFL Draft Fanatic. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy your Wednesday night, and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow. So thank you, everybody.
See ya.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, the Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on X at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. Please follow the Draft Professor channel on YouTube at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. We look forward to seeing you on our podcast tomorrow.